Welcome to the second part of our three-part webinar series on high-performance board tools. In this session, we're going to focus on planning, and my name is Belinda Doveston, so welcome, and let's get right to it. Planning is an absolutely critical part of the board process, and as we saw in the previous one, if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So what we're really doing is adding other tools into our toolkit as a director and making sure that we use the right tool for the right purpose and that all tools that are required are indeed used. So a key part of the board process and protocol is the planning cycles that take place. I'm not talking about business planning, financial planning. Those are all key things that must happen and will happen within each of the dimensions of the STAR Enterprise Governance Compass. What I'm talking about here are the mechanisms and tools used for good governance and for high performance boards. So what I'd like to do is start by talking about a very important planning tool called the board assessment. Now, when we work with our clients who are implementing a high-performance board and governance within their companies, one of the first things that we do is we conduct this thing called the board assessment, high-performance board assessment. And this process is really a helicopter view looking at the organization and its practices across its governance and board activities and assessing those activities against a standard. Now, we particularly have our own set of criteria that we have developed and use. You might, if you are doing a board assessment, use the King Code or the Combined Code from the UK. There's a variety of different types of ways of putting together the requirements of good governance. And so whatever tool you might use, the board assessment is a process of really looking across the business and saying, what is the level of sophistication or implementation of existing high-performance board aspects and governance practices? And where might those areas need some improvement? Where are there really good delivery in those areas, and where do we really need to focus our attention going forward? So the opportunity is to develop a clear and focused implementation plan that as a board, as a new board combined and focused on delivering value to the company, that you have a very good idea as to what exactly the issues are and where as a board you should be paying attention over the next 12, 18 months, 24 months, etc. So it is a very powerful tool of having this kind of vision or this plan of what do we need to implement by when and what's important, what are the priorities. So for one company, you might find that there's no directors and officers liability insurance, so that's a high priority. Yet for other companies, other things may take high priority. You might find that there's no strategic framework whatsoever, and that's the place to start. So every company will, depending on how much it's worked in the space, have varying degrees of work to do. Yet all companies, if you're using the right set of criteria to assess governance and high performance, you will have a severely long list of things that do need to be tackled because organizations are continuously improving. We recommend that a board assessment, by whatever name you call it and whatever format you use it, is a tool for measurement. For the board, it's an opportunity to define the plan for the next 12 months and longer if necessary, and then allows the board to review that governance assessment as part of the next 12-month cycle, part of the board evaluation, and you can then track how as a board have we implemented the things that are really critical and did we get them done in the right sequence. So the board assessment does just that. It's a tool for measurement. It's a tool to hold the board accountable, to make sure that the board delivers on the things that are highest priority for the governance of the company in question. Of course, the challenge with this tool is that it is a struggle often to be a living tool. So in other words, it gets done once, gets signed off, and that's the end of it. So unless the tool gets brought back into the board papers, back into the board's awareness on a regular basis, and timelines and outcomes are refined and progress is updated, it really will be something that just gathers dust and doesn't add value. And what a shame to know exactly what it is you need to do to deliver value through the board and then not use the tool that you have. If you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. The other thing is that depending on who conducted your board assessment and what set of criteria they used, you could find that you're just missing the breadth and depth of board focus areas that will really sort of dig into the nitty-gritty of board improvement and board delivery. So you're really encouraged to make sure that whatever methodology you use, that it really does unpack the practical realities of the board's delivery and what the key focus areas need to be as a result. Powerful tool, especially if it's brought back into the board's regular review processes and becomes a living tool. The next tool, which is really important, is what we call the board expedition calendar. We call it an expedition calendar because the board goes on these annual expeditions round the compass. And so it allows the board to focus on creating a planning culture and thinking ahead. So there's two ways that this works. The first way is that it allows the board to follow a set of themes throughout the 12 months. So that every month when we have the board, that we know exactly for the next few boards to come, what exactly is the theme that we're going to focus on. What that means, it allows particularly the chairman and the managing director to plan ahead for the board papers that are required, the preparation information, the types of discussions and decisions that are required, and it gears the whole organization into this new rhythm of planning the boards and planning the cycles of thinking and what that thinking is going to be and the preparation required for that thinking, which means by the time that you have the board meeting, there's a lot of thought and care that's gone into the discussion, and you can really maximize this very short amount of time that the board sits together. The other thing that it really does is allows you to plug in the specific dates for the year ahead. And this is a practical issue that we've seen in many, many cases. So what tends to happen is if you have a board calendar and you've got your themes all plugged in, that's fantastic. What happens if you don't have any dates plugged in? So in other words, we're planning our dates from month to month, or board meeting to board meeting. And many of the clients we've worked with prefer this. They're like, well, we're busy and we don't know until we're closer if we're going to be ready for the papers and if everyone's available. And all this does is it just breaks down the rhythm. It breaks down the management team's opportunity of preparing, of thinking ahead, of planning and creating a planning culture. So we often say that up front, disasters do happen where you have to move a board meeting. But when I say disasters do happen, I mean disasters. I don't mean double bookings of diaries. So directors should plan the year out, a year in advance on a rolling calendar, plan out the year, decide what dates the board meetings are going to be, perhaps in a particular cycle, like the last Thursday of every month or whatever it might be. And that goes into the diaries. And then that's it, people. Unless there's an act of God or something that's really difficult in your personal life that cannot be avoided, like a family crisis, you pitch for that board meeting. And you make sure it happens, because committing to that process creates rhythm, creates powerful flow, and it starts to build up this momentum. The business starts gearing itself towards a planning culture. And surprise, surprise, we often find that one of the big difficulties of implementing a board is a lack of a planning culture. And directors are needing to step into a situation where making decisions based on plans, and there isn't even a culture around planning, let alone actual good quality plans they can make decisions against. So the opportunity with a board calendar is to get that momentum and get the plan boards in. It's booked in the diaries in advance. Shouldn't be an issue. Work around it if you've got problems. Of course, the challenge is it requires the board and directors and executive team to think ahead, and of course, the C word, commitment, to honor the commitment that was made to the board, and not flip-flop around dates that you know in advance. Get them in the diary, and then that's a commitment, and then you pitch. Then we have another very important tool called the board my goodness, I'm ahead of myself. We're still in the board expedition calendar. What I have for you is a sample of a board calendar using one. And we have a sequence from 1 to 4 of this, or in this case, there's 6 boards a year, so a sequence of 6. And then we have the meeting dates, and then we have the particular measure of governance that the board will be focusing on. Here it is organizational culture, the leadership continued over 2 sessions, and then stakeholder engagement. So that you make sure that across your entire 12-month calendar, depending on how often you have boards, that you actually cover all aspects of the STAR Enterprise Governance Compass. This means that in your planning, in your cycle of development as a board, you have looked at the board from all 8 dimensions of governance, that you've considered all aspects, and that more importantly, those aspects have been plugged into your calendar when they're appropriate. So one of the things that's important is that you don't just, do business planning and budgeting at any time of the year. You do that prior to the commencement of the new financial year, and you can't have budgets and business plans until you've got a strategy. And so it's a process of, there's this trickle down cycle that is linked to your financial year end, and you have to make sure that your calendar brings to life that cycle, those sequences of events and things that are particular to you. For example, there might be a particular time of the year where your annual general meeting is appropriate or has been listed in your memorandum of incorporation, and so you need to plug into your calendar things that are specific and relevant to the timing. Remember, this is all about timing and rhythm and momentum, and the planning that drives those activities and builds up momentum. Think of the image of a boat that's trying to plane, and it kind of stops and starts and stops and starts, never gets enough momentum to pop into the top of the water and just zoom off into the horizon. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get enough momentum over a sustained period of time to be on top of the water, and therefore movement forward requires that much less effort. Then we have our pre-board meetings. Okay, so this is directly tied to the calendar, and particularly in the King Code, they refer to both, the chairman and the managing director having a pre-board meeting, as well as the recommendation that independent directors meet as their own team prior to a board. So the pre-board meetings really are an opportunity to plan for the meeting to come. They, particularly the chairman and the MD, when they meet, their task is to look at the calendar item to come and to plan for the theme and the particular board papers and decisions that the business is needing to make at a particular time. And so that really drives planning and creates wonderful flows of information, the right information flowing at the right time. The challenge of the pre-board meetings is that, I suppose the biggest challenge is that they don't happen. It's not something that's widely conducted in a private company. If they do happen, one of the challenges is that they can be quite informal or done for the sake of, because you should do a pre-board meeting, therefore we're doing it and we've ticked the box. The purpose of the pre-board meeting is not to be chummy between chairman and MD, or do this while you're playing a round of golf, or over a cup of coffee and a casual conversation. This is a meeting where we sit down and we apply our minds to the planning of the board meeting and really thinking about what will it take to really unlock value in the board meeting and provide all the directors with the right information that will allow the board to fulfill its fiduciary duty and to act in the best interests of the company. So I mentioned the chairman and managing director pre-board meeting. We recommend that this happens at least 14 days prior to the board. Because why? Because the management team need time to prepare papers. Now, if we only send papers, to be distributed 5 days prior, unless you might have a particular admin process in between to collate, which probably is the case. Yet, it doesn't leave you much time to collate all that information and to gather the information and put it all together. So, at least 14 days prior to the board. And we've included just some ideas of some of the things that we include in our pre-board checklist, which is, first looking on the matters arising from the previous board meeting. Where are we at with action items? Is there anything that requires a discussion? Is there anything where, chairman's support is required? This is not about going over all the action items one by one. If it's done, it's done. Unless it needs a discussion, move on. Second part is looking at the board meeting theme, looking at what are the specific outcomes for the theme, what should be the expedition strategy focus, which is a tool we'll talk about in a later session, what board papers are required, and are there any other relevant or related issues that should be considered. And then the third aspect of this meeting is a governance compass review. So a brief overall assessment of governance, the different 8 dimensions, what support is required by management. So this is the managing director's opportunity to say this is where we need more support, and then any general areas or issues requiring the chairman's guidance. So this is a very important meeting for a managing director to really get support from the chairman and really ask those questions and engage and learn about good governance, about high performance boards, and for the chairman to really drive an agenda of planning through this meeting. It's also advised that the independent directors on a board also meet, because as an independent director, as much as you are an equal director to every other director, sometimes there might be issues or insights that you cannot discuss in front of the executive directors or that relate to them, and it really is good as a team of independents to apply your minds to what's really going on. What have you heard that I haven't heard? I've seen this. What do you think? I just get this feeling that ... So this is a really powerful meeting. We encourage that this obviously happens prior to the board meetings, so that you're prepared. And I would imagine that the best time is after you've reviewed the board papers that you meet. And it's really an opportunity in the first part to talk about general views, questions, or concerns. Anything that comes up for you around the board papers that you reviewed, and particular areas where, as independents, we can add value to this meeting to come. In the second session, this is an opportunity to go through what we call the board meeting checklist, and really it's just the SEDAR Enterprise Governance Compass summarized into a number of points, making us just think about things like strategy is clearly defined. Is there a calendar in place? Is the board effective? The managing director and executive directors, are they coping with the workload? Okay, are we holding them accountable? Risk, what kind of risks? Are we liquid and solvent? Financials, continuous improvement, and what could we do to step up our performance, independence, and add more value to this company? So this meeting is as much about, what are we seeing and what's happening in this company, as much as how do we be exceptionally critical of our performance, and how can we take our contribution to a higher level in the meeting to come and create even more value for this company. And then, of course, a general section where we look at any particular items we want to add to the agenda, any support required by management, and any issues or warnings or flags that we need to raise from Secretariat or the company secretary or whatever structure is being used by the company that we need to communicate to the Secretariat. And then, of course, general issues requiring discussion. So these are straight from our methodology toolkit, and I hope have helped just to create some framing around planning and what's possible. And of course, a very important part of the planning process, which comes at the end of the 12-month cycle, is the board evaluation. The board evaluation is an annual planning process where we look back on our performance individually as directors and the board as a collective, and we're exceptionally critical of that performance against a set of standard criteria. And the opportunity of that is to continuously improve, is to create value as a board, is to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard, is to challenge our thinking to the next level, and to identify specific things for the next 12 months that we want to achieve as a board, and things that we want to develop individually and collectively. Huge challenge with the board evaluation process is that there is what we call participation apathy. So dreadfully awful long period of trying to get people to submit their board evaluation processes. We do ours digitally through an online questionnaire. So it's really quite tough to get people to participate. And then the other aspect is that unless the directors are really being exceptionally critical themselves and already thinking about the board's performance and really interrogating their understanding, we don't get the level of renewal and continuous improvement that we should out of a board evaluation. So it's an absolutely critical process. It's not something that, the paperwork says we should do or the King Code says we should do, but so therefore we must and tick the box. This is a learning journey. This is about sitting back and reflecting on our performance as a board and taking that learning into the next cycle. Some really powerful planning tools, and planning and implementing planning and understanding this planning culture dimension is a fantastic dimension of a high performance board, and one that as a director you're really encouraged to drive as an agenda. Be critical of the level of planning, be kind with the level of stage of growth of the company and its team, yet do expect a high level of standard of them as they continue to evolve, and ensure that the planning processes do support this momentum and rhythm and foresight that maximizes the board and its time together.